Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey there, and welcome to you. It's April 12, another ridiculously glorious day here in Pittsburgh, PA. I'm expecting a fascinating guest who should be calling in soon. And meanwhile, I have to read you this one letter to the New York Times that I really liked. It was in today's paper. It's from a woman named Sarah Nichols. She writes, "Dear men, you have no uterus. You have no ovaries. You have no capacity to give birth, notwithstanding the fact that you're involved in 100% of unwanted pregnancies. Not one of you has felt the fear of dying during a severely difficult labor or delivery. Not one of you has had to live with the physical toll a traumatic pregnancy can have on your body. And how many of you step up to the task of rearing the children you spawn? Not enough. You have no right, none, zero, to dictate what any woman can do with her body." I sort of liked that. I thought it was direct and to the point. So wanted to share that with you. Geez, I hate to start something up and then having the woman who's coming on is Susan Stein. She has been someone who I have felt privileged to know. And I got to know her on a fluke, in a way, in that she had been due to do performance and educational work at a college outside of Green Bay, St. Norbert College. And it's a college, I think I've mentioned this before, that my father endowed a peace and justice center, which does amazing work. And it had brought her in. So she flew to Green Bay from New York City and got hit by a blizzard, which is what happens when you go to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And the blizzard prevented much of what she was supposed to do there. The head of the center got in touch with me and he said, "There's this amazing woman and it all went downhill here, but her next stop is Pittsburgh. And I really think you should get in touch." Well, that's how I met her. And she was coming to Pittsburgh. She was coming to Pittsburgh to go to some of the prisons around here, some of the schools around here, and also to perform her one-woman play called Etty. And I had her on the show. And she was just, you know how some people just blow you away. In the course of doing a gazillion interviews, she was one. So I have to tell you, she is who I hope will be calling in and we can talk some more. The work she does is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. She's got one of the more restless minds and indefatigable spirits of anyone I've ever met. And she does nothing but move things forward. Okay. I've been told Susan's on. Susan's on the line. Hey, Susan, are you there?
Here. Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes,
can you hear me?
I can. Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. So good to hear you.
Okay. It's so good to hear you. I've been extolling your multifaceted talents and virtues to my audience, and saying how privileged I am to have befriended you. But I with you, it's always hard to know where to start. You're coming into Pittsburgh, and the thing is, you travel a lot, right? Let's be clear. You travel a lot. You go into cities, you go into schools, you go into prisons, you go on stages. You've done this in Europe. You've done it here. And it all sort of has a center in what, I don't know how to, okay, you know what? I'm going to stop babbling and ask you to describe what it is you do.
Well, first of all, it's a privilege to be with you this morning. Thank you for this. Thanks for inviting me and bringing me into this space. I love your use of the word center. I wouldn't have thought that, and there is a center. Etty Hillesum is the center. She kept these diaries and wrote letters from 1941 to 1943, and found a freedom inside herself, even though she was surrounded by hatred and barbarity and fascism, and it only got worse. And eventually, took her life. But inside of that, she finds this freedom, which becomes kind of unshakable. And I didn't know the project would lead me to all the places that you mentioned. I didn't know any of that. I continue to be surprised. Yesterday, I was kind of arranging because I'm going to Iceland in June. I didn't know I would go to Iceland, that I would bring Etty there. So it continues to surprise me. Before I come to Pittsburgh, I've actually been invited to Chestnut Hill College. I'll be bringing Etty to the college. That was one of the first places I brought her. And now it's going back there in Philadelphia. And the panel discussion after the performance, there's always a second act, which invites the audience to kind of, Etty begins a conversation and then the audience, becomes part of that conversation in the second act. Now following that, or as part of that, we'll have a panel of returning citizens and members of an organization called Uplift Solutions. And
let us be clear. Wait. Susan, let us be clear. You use the phrase returning citizens, where most Americans would know what you were talking about if you said ex-cons. I'm just translating.
Thank you for that. Right. So yeah, people refer to formerly incarcerated men and women as, formerly incarcerated men and women, and many other things. But the term we're using is returning citizens. And there will be returning citizens there. And one of them, Yusef Jones, who I have been teaching with and working with for at least 4 years now, he will be there that night, and then he will drive me to Pittsburgh. And we will Yusef will join there'll be a panel discussion. I hope people listening will come, and I hope that they will tell as many people as they can. There'll be a panel discussion of returning citizens, sociologists, political activists, social justice activists.
And this is after your performance at the Carnegie Stage. On April 21, right?
Right. Or no, April 22.
22. That's a Saturday night. Guys, I cannot tell you what a powerful thing this will be. It's a small theater, so if you have any interest in having your heart uplifted, your mind blown, this is where you want to be. on April 22nd. Marvelous little theater. And Susan does this one-woman production called Etty, after the woman who centers her life, Etty Hillesum, who is not a name that many people know. And as Susan said, Etty was, well, between 1941 and 1943, she kept a diary, right? And
yes.
She was in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And strangely, so was another young Jewish woman or girl, Anne Frank, who also kept a diary. It is Anne Frank who so many people know. I mean, has to be one of the most well-known humans, historical humans, Anne Frank. Etty Hillesum was there at the same time writing. She was a bit older than Anne Frank, about 10 years, right? 10 years older, a little more.
About 15 years, yeah.
Okay, and a lot more complicated by virtue of being and her diaries are mind-blowing. And Susan has taken them, ingested them, and then the verb you use is collaged them into this piece in which all that we hear when you're on stage is Etty Hillesum's words. And, you know, it strikes me that you have done something pretty astonishing. You have resurrected a human being. You have kept someone who has been dead for a long time now. You have essentially brought her back to life and kept her alive and put her in places she couldn't imagine, touching people she couldn't imagine. And that's a remarkable thing.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. I wake up many mornings anxious and frustrated and kind of unsure of how to keep going. It's a hard project, but there are the moments when I am sharing her words. Those are not hard moments. Those feel like a gift. I did not know I would get to bring her to as many places. It was my hope. My hope when I started the project was to bring her words to as many people as possible. I didn't like her diaries when I started reading them. I felt she was self-centered and kind of a drama queen and pretty full of herself. And I didn't understand why my college roommate's mother had recommended them. I kept reading. I was good. I kept reading. And then something shifted. I'm not sure when. And she became a very close, intimate friend of mine. She invited me into places that I had never been to before, inside myself, or with anyone, or even privately. And I'd never had that experience before in a book. And then when I finished, I didn't understand why she wasn't well known, why she wasn't more known in the world, with this remarkable sensibility that she has. But she is, you know, her writing is not precious. She's flawed. She's human. It's one of the ways that certainly students and audiences respond to her. They love that about her, that she is real. She's a real person. And I do bring it to places that I didn't expect. I bring it to audiences, some audiences that don't believe the Holocaust happened. I am able, with her words and this project, to bring many levels of history into places where that's being challenged and has been challenged. So it's been surprising.
Yeah, let's give a sense, a bit of her history. So this is a woman who came from it sounds like a sort of upper middle class family.
Higher end of middle class, but yeah. And she's, I had the privilege of spending an afternoon with Aharon Appelfeld in Jerusalem several years ago. And he said, he's the great Israeli writer, he said she was the perfect example of an assimilated Jew, a European assimilated Jew. And she was, her father was a classicist. And she lived an intellectual, highly intellectual, and bohemian life.
Wasn't her brother a piano prodigy who performed all over the place, or her brother?
She had two younger brothers, right? So
Yeah.
One was a medical, brilliant, kind of working as an intern at the point where she's writing and reading, and her other brother her youngest brother was a prodigy. He suffers with some mental illness. He suffers with what was diagnosed then as schizophrenia. There's actually some challenges on that. That's kind of another story. But so he was hospitalized and in and out of the hospital. But the Germans valued his piano playing. He could have actually gone to an artist colony called Barneveld, which might have helped him survive. The Jews in Barneveld were deported, but not until much later. But yeah, she did have these two brothers. They're all very special. These three.
Yeah, they seem like amazing people. But the Nazis wiped them all out. They're all gone. The
entire Hillesum family, there were no extended family members that survived.
They're gone. They do not, which is another reason why I'm so, just the fact that she lives. And,
well, if I can interrupt, it's also another reason why we know of Anne Frank. There are many reasons to know of Anne Frank. She's a great writer, but she also had her father who devoted his life to getting her words out to the world.
That's right.
There are other great writers. Yitzhak Rudashevsky from the Vilna Ghetto was, an amazing writer, and his diary too is pretty unbelievable. But no one in his family survived. So that diary, it's on us to take those words and try to get them to as many people as possible. And I have the privilege of getting to work with Classrooms Without Borders in Pittsburgh that helps me do that, so that we get to bring those words, from Yitzhak Rudashevsky, from other diarists, and not just from the Holocaust, also from enslaved people, from people in Japanese internment camps, from people in different moments in history. Those voices, they dared to write, they dared to bear witness to their circumstances, which is an unbelievable act of resistance and an act of inspiration and humanity. And being able to kind of go into schools and other venues with these writings, with these excerpts, keeps, I don't want to say it keeps them alive, because they, most of these people died pretty brutally. They were murdered, but it lets us into a fragment of their lives, and it lets them honor and remember and be inside of that. And I think that's important for so many reasons, and also profoundly moving.
Yes. So explain, though, there's so much with you, it always is the case. There's so many places I could go talking to you. I want to get back into the prisons and the schools, but I also want a clear sense of this young woman who was how old was when she was murdered? She was 29?
Well, it was 5 weeks before her 30th birthday.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have the exact date. We just go by a Red Cross date. But she's 27 years old when she begins the diaries. She actually begins them as part of her therapy. She suffered with struggles with the serious depression, which was sometimes debilitating. so for that, she seeks the help of a therapist, a German Jewish refugee, Julia Speer, who was actually a student of Jung's. And she begins therapy with him, and he has her keep a diary, which she doesn't want to do. She thinks it's silly. She writes, keeping a diary is an art I do not understand. At one point she writes, I can't just write, and then this happened, and then this happened. That won't do. But because she wanted to be a writer, and she is committed to the therapy, the diary does take off on its own. And she, it becomes something even larger than the therapy. But it is part of the therapy. I mean, I was invited to Duke University through Historian of Medicine, and there I actually visited classes for a couple of years that looked at Etty's diary as a medical document, which it is. One can do that. And it was interesting because when I hadn't thought of it in that way, and when I did go to Duke, I then paired some of her writings with Anne Frank's, which is a diary of puberty. So yes. It is interesting to look at these. I mean, they are two young women, and since Anne Frank is in today's conversation, I will say that had Anne Frank lived longer, I think that she was on the road to becoming more like Etty. They have a lot more in common than they have differences.
I totally see that. And I mean, my God, they were both what? They were both living in the same city at the same time. There was overlap there, right?
Yeah, and they're both highly assimilated Jews. They're both writers. They both choose writing as an act of resistance. They go to their, it's very powerful. I was working on a lesson plan to go to a school with a diary of Etty's, an excerpt, and I'm working on it. And after about an hour, I just looked to see if Anne Frank had written on that date, and she had. On that morning in Amsterdam, in July of 1942, when measures got increasingly threatening in Amsterdam, that same morning, because they write that it's the morning, they both go to their notebooks. That's what they do. That's what they choose to do. About a mile apart, not knowing each other. They choose witness over terror. And it's very powerful. They're also both products of the Enlightenment. And they hold on to that Europe and that world and that thinking, even though that's not the Europe they're in at that moment, because fascism is reigning. But they're both products of the Enlightenment.
Well, Etty ends up at what was the transit camp right outside of Amsterdam, where it was the way station before you got loaded onto the cars, the cattle cars to Auschwitz. And right?
Yeah, so almost all Jews in the Netherlands were deported to Westerbork. Anne Frank actually was there as well. Most Jews, go through Westerbork, and then Etty is deported to Auschwitz from there. Yeah.
So she would witness this, and she knew it was to be her fate too. But the thing about her diary is where you would assume despair and rage, and I can't imagine. There's very little of that, right?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think she does. So first of all, we only have her diaries through October 1942. That's the last date of her diary that we have, other than 4 paragraphs that she quotes in a letter in August of 43. So we do have those 4 paragraphs. But other than that, we only have till October 42. The diaries after October 42, she brings with her to Auschwitz. So we don't have that whole kind of final, because she's deported to Auschwitz on September 7th, 1943. So we don't have kind of those 11 months. What we have after October 42 is we have letters, and so that has a different audience. Is there despair? She writes about that, but she writes about it coming out of it. You know, how she, you know, thought she had lost all hope, and how, you know, so she's kind of coming out of that when so that's in between the lines, or that's in the spaces that we're not reading. In terms of anger, I'm really glad, and rage, I'm really glad you brought that up. I didn't know, I'll say a couple of things about that if I can. I didn't know I was going to bring this play to schools. And the first school I brought it to was an inner city school, considered a high-risk inner city school in Brooklyn, New York. And when I did the piece there, this young man said at the end, and it was a different piece that it was much shorter. I was kind of in process then. And he said, okay, I get that she didn't hate. I get that she didn't want to hate, but did she think it was okay to be angry? And it was such a powerful response that I still remember it. It kind of lives in me. And I said, that was such a great comment. And yes, she did. I mean, she writes that you have to be angry at injustice. I think that she makes a distinction between anger and hatred. She's committing herself, you know, not to hate. That's one of the things. She doesn't want to go there. She believes it does not lie in her nature, she writes. So I think she's committing herself not to move in that direction. And I think that we begin to see a shift in her anger as the letters go on. So, for example, and I hope people, if they don't read her diaries, I hope they at least read, you know, her two great letters, which were actually used by the Dutch resistance to let people know what was going on. So those were published clandestinely in 1943. The August 1943 letter, which is her final long letter and a masterpiece of writing, is there's a shift there. You're seeing, first of all, the SS are now, you know, part of that, the deportation. She's seeing them. And, you know, she'll say, she's watching them, and she says, I saw no trace of human warmth on their faces. At what fronts did they learn their business? So up until then, she's connecting with Dutch guards who are doing their job. Yeah. But now it's shifted. It's the green uniformed men. That's the SS. And she's using the word frightened, scared. She talks about the men's faces and says, I've never been as scared of anything in my life. So there is a shift. And I think it's important to understand that, because we don't have her writings from Auschwitz. You know, she gets to Auschwitz on the 10th of September. And I, you know, was she surprised by Auschwitz? I can't imagine she was surprised. All that would have surprised her would have been the industrialization. I don't think that she understands what Auschwitz is, because the German propaganda machine was brilliant. But I don't think it would have surprised her. She writes on July 3rd, 1942, very early, which shows kind of her, the self-aware woman who is really looking into the heart of things. She writes, I'm going to have to draw a line under everything, admit a new insight into my life and make a place for it. They are out to destroy us completely.
Yeah.
So she has that insight on July 3rd, 1942. Does she hold on to that? I don't know. Can we hold on to an insight like that? You know, I don't know.
Did she not, Susan? Just the image of it astonishes me. When she is loaded onto one of the trains for Auschwitz, did she not throw a postcard or a letter off into the Dutch countryside?
Yeah, thank you for that, for remembering that, Lynn. So she waits until the freight car is actually out of Westerbork, and through, I believe it's two, we have one of them, but there were two postcards that she pushes through the broken planks of the freight car that fall into a field, and a farmer picks, we know of one up, which is addressed to her 7th grade Latin teacher, but also her father's colleague and family friend, who has been sending the family care packages and all kinds of things while they've been at Westerbork. So it has kind of that card has a lot of layers to it. She's letting them know, she's letting Christine, who the card is addressed to, know, don't send anymore, because she's sensitive to the fact that it's hard during the war for anybody to send anything, that Christine is depriving herself in terms of sending these things, but also, that they're leaving. She writes an amazing line in that postcard. If we think of it being the final words we have of her, she writes, "We left the camp singing."
Oh my God. We left the camp singing?
Yes.
How is that even conceivable?
Well, so a student in Florida at a university when I was there asked, what were they singing? Like
a prayer, maybe.
Well, that's a great, right. That's a great thought. So I happen to, again, have had the honor and privilege to get to learn with Jaap Polak and Ina Soap, who were at Westerbork. Jaap Polak was actually a teacher at the school. He was the principal of the school at Westerbork. Yes, they had an elementary school at Westerbork. Nice. And he was there. They were both deported to Bergen-Belsen. Their story itself is interesting. They have a book. They're no longer alive. Jaap lived until over 100, but they have a book and a film made about them called "Steal a Pencil for Me," and I got to work with them for a few years before they died. And they even came to a couple of performances and were part of the discussion after. Wow. And I learned from them what they sang on the trains that left Westerbork.
What was it?
I will share that, although it's sad to say it. So he witnessed many of those trains leaving. They sang the Dutch national anthem.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So I don't, I never think it's a worthwhile question to wonder what one would do in the circumstances of World War II, because those are those circumstances. They won't be repeated in that way. But I do wonder, if I had to leave this country, which is my home, what would I sing? I was forced to leave. It's a question that learning that has kind of summoned up in me. Here are these people that are leaving. Yeah, and on those trains they're leaving. They're Dutch. They're Dutch Jews, and they are Dutch, and they love their country, and they are leaving their home, and that's what they're singing.
Yeah.
And it's a very moving and powerful national anthem. I'd like to put a little bit of it at the. Yeah, it has. It is kind of almost, it's spiritual without being religious. It has that kind of feeling. I can see why they chose those lines.
I wanna get into. All right, so you encounter this diary. You at first don't even like the diarist, and then she insinuates herself into your very soul, and in some ways takes over the rest of your life. And the fact that this woman, this Dutch young woman, and it's 80 years, more than 80 years ago, you take her words into, let's start with the prisons, into prisons where your audience, has no, I just can't imagine why you would think that prisoners would want to hear this story about this, Jewish person back when. I think that was very brave of you to do, and yet I know you think it's been some of the most powerful stuff that you have encountered is in those prisons and that audience.
Yeah, the prison performances are the most powerful, but it is complicated. There have been incarcerated men in a couple of the prisons, particularly Perth in Scotland, who would not come to see the play because they were denying the Holocaust and felt very strongly about that. So it is complicated, but it wasn't my idea. I can't take credit for the idea of bringing the play to prisons. I had done the play in its infancy at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and a woman who works with the had thought of bringing the play to prisons because the Anne Frank centers throughout the world actually have relationships with incarcerated people sending the diaries. And as soon as she said it, I thought, oh gosh, that's a great idea. And no, I hadn't. And I knew that was right. And it took 2 years for me to get the project into the first prison, which was actually in Maine, in a women's prison. Mostly I'm in high security male prisons, but that was a women's prison. And it has been really powerful. What I've learned, I got to spend a month in Minnesota through a grant where I got to actually read the diaries with incarcerated men and women at 2 different prisons. And I would go 2 to 3 times a week and actually read the diaries together. And what I learned there in Minnesota, I may have known this, but not consciously, was that Etty's story is a prison story. And what one man, usually I'm with lifers, which means incarcerated people who have, been sentenced, they're serving a life sentence, which is again different in Europe because life, doesn't mean life in the UK. But this one man said, she gets prison. And
he said she gets prison. She understands.
Right.
She is in prison.
Yeah, and he appreciated that. Yeah. I mean, she's writing and really looking at both sides of the barbed wire. And, there's a great line where she says the barbed wire is a question of attitude. It's in my play. And then she's really exploring that about, what's on the different sides. And the incarcerated people that I work with and have visited in no way compare their incarceration with, or imprisonment with hers. They're very respectful of her circumstances and the difference. But the similarities are strong. And yeah, and I had a particularly powerful experience in Minnesota, actually, when I had finished my reading, doing the reading for the month, but I happened to still be there a couple of extra days. And I went, through the librarian, who was wonderful, this incredible woman at the prison. And I got to go to their next book, which was a book by Diane Wilson. And she was there. And it was a lot of the women who had been part of my book club, if you will, on Etty, but it was also other women. And a lot of the women were Native American. And I learned that Native American women are there's a high percentage of Native American women incarcerated in Minnesota, which I didn't know. And that night at that talk, I've written about this, through this book and through Diane Wilson speaking.
Who is Diane Wilson?
She's a writer, and she actually has since had a really successful book called The Seed Keeper. But at that time, It was a different book that she had read, and I got to, the incarcerated women and the librarian and Diane Wilson let me join, so I got to come back and just be kind of another reader in the group. And what I witnessed that night, which was so powerful, was this book of Diane Wilson's was about how Native American children were taken from their families right through the 1970s and put into foster care. And I was alive in the 70s. I didn't know this. And I just didn't even know this history. I mean, this is where this project has led me. And now I'm in this room with these women, and one woman speaks to that and says, she completely accepts responsibility for why she's there, but that there were things that happened to her and her family, and she didn't know that it was part of something larger. She thought it was just her, that what had her family done wrong. And one by one, the women started speaking, and it didn't feel like I was in a room of confessional speaking. It felt like I was in a room of witness, and this kind of awareness of, wow, what happens when you read something and it goes into, it brings you to, oh wait, I'm not alone. This was part of a movement. This was part of history. This was organized. This was part of something larger.
And in that respect, it was not unlike what the Nazis did. It was a government-sponsored program to separate families, deprive people of their human rights, right? I mean, in that regard, it's a government program that did that.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I mean, we know our history with Native Americans. It's destroying the people.
Yes, and it was, well, yeah. So here's what you then, I once had, again, this amazing experience of sitting in on a Zoom thing that you did with prisoners, incarcerated people, Pittsburgh cops, Duquesne professors, New York playwright, and you, and then other people who, and you were doing a writing workshop. So this all comes out of that, bringing Etty into the prisons, that you end up now doing these writing workshops?
Right. So Duquesne brought me, they had an endowment, and they brought me years ago. And when I said I go to prisons, they said, we're going to connect you with Norm Conti, because he works in prisons, and he's now the department chair, but he is a professor of sociology. And Norm and I hit it off right away. And every time Classrooms Without Borders would bring me back to Pittsburgh, which I come through Classrooms Without Borders a couple of times a year. I mean, I work a lot with them, and I'm incredibly grateful to that organization for partnering with me. Through them, I have brought Etty, and her writings to thousands of young people. So it has helped this mission very, very much. Yes. And so I started working more and more with Norm, and Norm is a brilliant and passionate human being who is really doing only good in the world. And he had an idea of bringing incarcerated men and police officers together to have a conversation so that these groups that would be adversarial can be in the same room together. What would that be like? What if we understood who we were set against? And one of the times it was going to be when I was bringing Etty that he thought, let's do that, because Etty itself, as hopefully people will come and see, starts a conversation. So he thought, we'll do the play and then we'll be in prison. And anyway, so we've been working together for a while. And then he had the idea for a class. And I co-teach the class with a wonderful actor and writer, Roger Glenvier-Smith. And we teach it through Duquesne. And it's called Performing History, Autobiography in Progress. And the class you came to, Lynn, did have incarcerated men from Fayette. It also has returning citizens. It has police officers. It has sociologists, and it has Duquesne students, and it has anybody else who wants to join, because we think, as this is happening, that this is a model to actually what's it like to talk to people that you wouldn't necessarily be in the room with.
I got to tell you, it was the most powerful. I was simply, I mean, I've never been able to forget it. Truly, you're right. You find yourself with people you would never, and the respect in that room, that virtual room, the listening to, the brilliance that came out of some of the words of the people who were in prison. And I want to point out that your co-teacher in this, Guinevere, what's his name? I don't know, Roger
Glenvier-Smith. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was recently here doing his play. He has a one-person play where he embodies Frederick Douglass, and it is powerful as holy hell. And he has done a number of projects and documentaries with Spike Lee. So this is, so that this guy who works with Spike Lee spends time with the prisoners here in Western Pennsylvania.
Well, the class is every week. It's every Friday at 11. And if any people want to join or come and observe, please do. I'll send you.
Well, how do they do that? How do they do that? So where would they look for that link?
They would just have to somehow contact, Norm Conti, actually, at Duquesne, to get the link.
He's the head of the sociology department at Duquesne. Okay, yep. You can figure that out. He will also be part of the discussion on April 22nd at the Carnegie Stage after your performance, right?
Yeah, he will facilitate that conversation. And I also want to say that, I was in Montgomery, Alabama for a few weeks ago, because I bring the project there every year now. And the students came to the class. We Zoomed, 25, 17, 18-year-old students from Montgomery with returning citizens and sociologists and police officers. So again, we got very different people into the same room, same Zoom room, same electronic room.
I remember you telling me, and I don't know if it was that school, but so you go down to these incredibly underfunded public schools in this country, and you spend maybe a week with the kids, and you do amazing things with them, but you've been blown away by the lack of resources that they endure, and by the incredible passion of some of these teachers that don't run but stay in these terrible conditions.
Absolutely, yes, to what you just said. I didn't realize how segregated our schools are. I mean, I grew up poor. I grew up in the projects in Brooklyn, and I was born in the '60s. I didn't realize how stuck we still are. I didn't realize that. So this project has shown me that, and I have been. It's heartbreaking to be in some of these schools with these beautiful teenagers who are living with such violence surrounding them, trying to just go to school every day and learn. It's really unbelievable. We should be ashamed of ourselves. We should be ashamed of ourselves as a country that we have this wealth and that our children are living in. I mean, in Montgomery, I'm in schools where I have to bring my cell phone into the bathroom so that there's light. There's no toilet paper. The seats are broken. The walls are broken. There's no soap. This is America, and these beautiful young children are. This is every day for them. So
you get the impression that they've already been essentially tossed aside. There's no sense that they can contribute to our future, so we don't invest anything in them.
Well, they know that. So do they get Etty? Yeah, they get
Etty. Yeah, they get Etty.
Yeah, they understand. They make profound insights into into not only her diary, but into other diaries. It's interesting. I've learned a lot. I didn't know that the word ghetto was a verb. I only knew it as a noun. And so that word itself has led to some really interesting conversations and a lot of learning on all sides.
Use it as a verb. I didn't know it was a verb. What do you mean it's a verb as well?
Young people use it as they'll use it as a verb. It's used as an adjective. It's used as a verb. It's not only used as a noun.
That's what my mother once, sitting outside my high school to pick me up for some reason. I got in the car and she was ashen face, and she said, "My God, they're using that word," and she meant the F word. They're using that word as a adjective, as a verb, as a noun. I mean, she was just beside herself. It just reminded me of that when you said that. Yeah, how a word can be so,
well, and it's been fascinating, actually. Right, and where does that word come from? And what's the connection with Jews? And what's the connection with Jewish history? And what do the ghettos in America have in common with? I mean, this all becomes material for us to think and talk about. And now they're meeting these young people from ghettos in Poland and Lithuania and other European countries in the 40s, and they, these are children who are starving and being starved, and they understand. There was a girl in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and we were looking at an anonymous girl's diary from the Łódź ghetto in Poland. And after a close reading of just this one paragraph, this girl in Asbury, the sophomore in Asbury Park, said she wrote those words with her stomach.
She wrote those words with her stomach.
And
meaning
I said,
she was hungry?
Yeah.
Is that what she meant?
Yeah, I mean, she's starving. It's a diary of starvation. And I looked at her and I said, you're absolutely right. And no one had ever said that before.
Wow.
So yeah, I am incredibly grateful when, Change, that was through an organization called Change, which was the first partnership I had, the Center for Holocaust, Human Rights, and Genocide Education. They really were the ones that started me going to schools, and they brought me to Asbury Park, and Classrooms Without Borders, brings me not only to Pittsburgh, they're bringing me to, when I come, after I leave, the day after my matinee at Carnegie Stage, I'll be in Cameron High School, 45 minutes from Wheeling, West Virginia, and I'll get to spend a day there with the students there. They send me to Ohio. They send me to Cleveland. They send me all places in between. I'll be at Westminster College, pairing Etty Hillesum with Zora Neale Hurston and looking at intersectionality. So there's a lot. The project has expanded, and I didn't know it would. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's So okay, let's just make sure people know where to see you, get this, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it just occurred to me the prop that you employ in Etty, which by the way it's one act, right? It's just you. Is that correct?
It's just
one act.
Just me and her words, right?
Yes,
right,
you and her words. And there's a suitcase. And that's what made me think of it when you said, so I go here, and then I'm Cleveland, and then I'm this and that. And I'm thinking, here you are, this woman who embodies Etty Hillesum. And you too always have a suitcase. You are always, this peripatetic, is that the word? I think it is. This traveling educator is what you are. You're so many things. So miss this performance at it is mind-blowing. Susan Stein will be doing Etty at the Carnegie Stage. That's in Carnegie. It's a great little theater. On the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, it's the 22nd, which is a Saturday night, that will have that special panel, bringing in those other people, which will be mind-blowing. But there is a discussion after every performance, because that's part of it, right? And there are two free matinees on the 20 and 21st, right? Is anyone able to go to those?
Yeah, they're matinees for students. And that Carnegie Stage has generously but has offered, and we have one school coming to the Friday morning matinee. We're hoping that maybe a couple of other schools join. And I did want to say, Carnegie Stage, even if you can't make it to Etty, and I really hope you can, it's an incredible theater doing really important work.
Yes.
And bringing new and unknown playwrights and known playwrights. They just do very important work. I just saw what kind of woman in New York, which actually started at Carnegie Stage. So they're just a very important theater, and it's important to support them. And also you can get information from, I didn't mention this because I'm not good at remembering this, but my website, which is Etty Project. It's one word. It's EPTY, the word project. So ettyproject.org. And the events are listed there, but also more information about Etty Hillesum, and you can contact me.
And to get
that's
tickets
another
for
way
the performances, Carnegie Stage, do we have geez, how do we?
So if you go to their website, they have everything all set up right there. And I think they also have student tickets and senior tickets, which are very inexpensive. So yeah, please let everybody know, like anybody that might be interested. Yeah, just pass the word around. And Lynn, thank you for doing this and always.
Oh, don't be. I mean, please, you're an amazing force for progress and good things. And thank you. And I'll look forward to seeing you. And I sure hope I'll see some of you guys there as well, because this is a very special opportunity. Thank you, Susan Stein. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Okay.
You.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. And you guys, I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll talk some more. Okay? Thank you.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.